Welcome, my name is Barney Reese. I'm the author of How Blessed You Are in God's Promises. We're going to get started on this. We're on chapter 41. This is going to be part 2. Hope you're enjoying it. Let's see where it was at. In the end, we thought it would be best to go to Meridian, Mississippi to live, and we loaded everything we could carry into a U-Haul and drove to Meridian, Mississippi. We never bought the business, just rented the building, and our landlord had promised his dad he would never go up on the rent. But he did after his father died. Me and my mother were still mourning over the loss of my dad, and I just wanted to make him proud. After we moved to Meridian, Mississippi, stayed in some low-rent apartments in which Susan had gotten us a place to rent. They were in the country, and I went to Clarkdale. I was an A and B student, but because I was the new kid, I was picked at I remember wrestling and losing. I was called names and sometimes wished to end it all. My mother got a check for my sister and herself, and she worked at a club under the table as the bartender at night. I got to where I did not go to school, and I would just not go. I failed the 7th grade for attendance, not my grades, did not care that I had lost my father, and was mercifully picked on to the breaking point. Rules were rules, and all students had to abide by them according to principles at the Clarkdale School. We later moved again. This time, my mother found a place of business on 22nd Avenue Heights, and she used the money to rent the building. I went to Carver Elementary School and Kate Griffin for 7th and 8th grade. We lived in the store, and then my mother decided to get a club to make some more money. So she rented a bar called the White Castle from a guy named Cleve Neely. The man was a jukebox man for years, and poker machines and pool tables were being robbed at night. So my mother got a Doberman Pinscher to guard her place at night. The dog was successful. Cleve Neely came and said, "No dogs allowed." The dog growled at him, and Cleve said he's going to kill the dog. Kill that dog. So my mother waited with her pistol for him. Instead, he came around to the back of the club and shot Molly. She came to my mother for protection, half her face blown off. My mother left the next day after he killed her dog. We still had the store, but the owner decided to sell it to a Lewis Record Company, and it was not a success after the Superstop opened down below us. So I guess the creator of the universe knew this. So my mother went to redo her Social Security benefits for herself and Wanda. She learned she could draw her first husband's benefits, which was quite a raise. She also had got $20,000 in back pay, in which my big sister decided it would be best if we moved on her property. So my mother bought a trailer from a trailer place that I helped pick out for her and moved to Bonita. After spending thousands of dollars and paying cash for her trailer, she moved above her daughter and paid the water bill for staying there. I guess we would go another school yet again, and we would have to live on with what we made. I worked when I could, but I was still young, of course. Byron had to stay there with Wanda and me. I watched Byron work and spend all his money on everything but living expenses. I do not remember him even buying groceries. All he wanted to do is party and brag about his roofing company. And my mother would always buy him a truck once one went down or he lost it. He had a dump truck, an older truck, and etc. My sister and brother-in-law did not like the way he treated us, and they did not want his truck on their property, or we would have to move. On the other hand, I continued to go to school and drive my little Ford Courier, not to say Ford, which I had put an engine in and redone it except for the transmission, which would drop out of 4th gear. I also groaned and my legs touched the steering wheel. It had no air, but nonetheless it was paid for. And after my Ford Courier was beside the road, blown engine, my mother had had one put in it. My truck was fixed for the first time. Being it got me from place to place. I really couldn't complain. I later complained about the size of my little truck and how I had grown. The next car that I had was a Nissan 240Z. It was black, no air. And after my brother did something to the engine, he put it in the shop to have it fixed and told me if I got it out, it would be mine. It took me over a year for this to happen, and the day finally came. I would get to drive it. I had just got it out of the shop, a 240Z. It was not new, but it was just a very fast car, and I was proud of it. I drove it to school and was listening to Sweet Child of Mine by Guns N' Roses on a Pioneer stereo. When I came up a hill, the sun blinded me. I pulled the sun visor down. It was a little too short. The next thing I knew, I hit a Chevy Blazer in the rear. The car hood was bent, the bumper untouched, radiator took the blow, and the brakes had not been bled, so I had to pump them to stop. The black lady looked at her bumper, not even a dent, got back in her SUV and left. I was crushed to say the least. I drove it back home and parked it Well, we fixed the car radio, fan clutch, got to come along and pulled frame out, and semi-bent hood out. It was not totaled and looked pretty good. I was always working on this car, from thermostat to universal joint to plug wires, to wonder why the car was still. I started to complain. I loved the car, but I hated no air. I was dressed up most of the time to work at Service Merchandise, and I was still in high school. My mother got me a 1984 Toyota Camry. Next, and although had high mileage, and we paid roughly $3,500 with about $2,500 of my note was roughly $200 a month in insurance. I worked at Service Merchants at the time and went to high school and later college. I went on a grant to college and I drove my 1984 Toyota Camry to school, and later I ended up having to have the engine rebuilt. I worked delivering pizzas for Pizza Hut and Domino's, and it had put too many miles on the Camry. The car was a burnt orange and tan interior. I drove it to college. I still remember this. I guess I was a normal guy. I trained in karate at least 2 hours a day and continued to work and try to pay my bills. Somehow I always made it. It was hard sometimes, but we managed. I was delivered newspapers from Meridian Star. When I had a fender bender, the right fender was hit. I had to get it fixed at the time. I was working at the U.S. Tobacco Company, which is Skoal in Copenhagen, and my job was to deliver samples and check the products for dates and rotate them with some as well. I paid $6.50 and I made $6.50 an hour and 28 cents a mile, and I had a great boss. I actually learned a lot about marketing. I was still in college, Meridian College, and I was still taking martial arts, Black Eagle karate. I later ended up having the engine overhauled, and when the car was ready, the man wanted all his money up front, could not make payments. My mother sold the trailer she was renting to fix my car, which the bill was over $2,000. And the guy did not do it right, so that the rings never seated properly, and the fender was fixed, but not properly, so it was not replaced. Just beat out and later painted over, which did not match the car at all. The car had about 240,000 miles on it or more. I had bought it with 180,000 miles, and since I had no one to help, and it smoked and used oil, on a whim, we took a drive to see Bobby Langford to see if we could help me in Enterprise, Alabama. He took the car on trade, so he sold me a 1987 Pontiac Firebird with a 350 engine, and he set my payments at $135 a month through the credit union. I remember what he said: "Son, take care of it," and I gave him some samples of Wintergreen Bandits in gratitude. I later had to put the tires on it, but Lillian liked it, and so did I. I remember this plain as day. I had a beautiful girlfriend. I was taking karate from Black Eagle. I was working at U.S. Tobacco Company, Service Merchandise, and though I had failed college because I had taken courses over my head, I was still going. I would have to pay my way through school now. I would have to make it somehow. I would pay my car, karate, and college since I was no longer on a scholarship. I was taking some of the basics there. I was barely getting by. I look back at the time I was with my girlfriend and never even kissed her. I was more or less being used and did not even know it at the time. I later could not afford to do it at all. I had an alcoholic brother, and every penny my mother was on Social Security, and between groceries and my brother's habits, we did not have no extra money. Both my jobs were part-time, so sometimes my mother would save and help me, but I pretty much paid my car some gas to go to school and work. I remember like it was yesterday. I went to pick up Elena, and though I had cared for this beneficiary goddess, after I picked her up from New Orleans at the airport, after visiting her parents in Venezuela, she asked me to marry her. I had nothing to give her. No great job, struggling through college, no home, and I declined. I remember telling her, "Whatever you do, do not marry for money, but love." I later could not afford to go to college, so I joined the Air Force. After all, I had went to college for 2 years, and I had learned a lot. Just some classes that was over my head at one time. I wanted to be an electrical engineer. I taken the AS5 test many times, and each time scored higher. I was taught to go to the F-16 maintenance, tactical maintenance, or F-16 crew chief. But I passed physical, and I joined the Air Force. I would come back and marry my girlfriend and take her with me. It was my plan. I left on the bus heading to basic training in San Antonio, Texas. I would finish basic training, go to tech school, and become an F-16 crew chief or F-16 maintenance, technical maintenance. I would one day have my name on the side of the jet, as the recruiter told me. I would come back as a man and marry my future wife, I thought, and I would have something to offer her, and we would have a family and a beautiful life. I instead learned about basic training in the Air Force. I had all my hair cut off to wait for our brother flight to show up. Could not call home because we were not allowed to for over a week.